in the most prestigious auto shop in town, a place reserved for Ferraris, Lamborghinis, and million-dollar Porsches. A woman walked in asking for a job. She had steady hands, a determined gaze, and a resume no one even bothered to read. Within 5 minutes, she became a joke, humiliated, challenged, and mocked by everyone, from the arrogant owner to the top mechanics in the city. But what none of them knew was that they were about to make the most expensive mistake of their lives. And the engine that would roar inside those walls would change everything forever. Mauricio Santander surveyed his workshop like a king atop a glass castle. Seated in a German chair worth more than most of his employees' annual salaries, he admired his creation, an empire of engines, luxury, and power. Italian ceramic floors, imported control panels, tools with unpronounceable names, and cars worth more than most homes. Only the most expensive vehicles in the country were allowed through those doors, and no mechanic dared to make a mistake. This was Mauricio's absolute domain, and he relished it. More than the cars, more than the money, he loved the power to humiliate. When the receptionist nervously buzzed in to say, "A young woman is here asking about the mechanic position," Mauricio let out a dry laugh. "A woman?" he repeated as if it were a joke. "Let her in, let's have some fun." The door opened, and Nayara stepped in, wearing a clean coverall, resume in hand, back straight, but eyes tense. Mauricio examined her the way one might inspect an overpriced wine or a circus animal. He didn't even take the paper from her hand, just stared at her with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You want to be a mechanic here?" he said, halfway between mockery and disbelief. "Yes, sir. I have 5 years of experience. I've worked at several shops. I studied, I trained." Nayara began, voice steady. 5 years changing oil at a neighborhood garage," he interrupted, throwing his head back in forced laughter. "That's what you call experience?" Outside, 3 mechanics peeked through the glass. Patricio, Emiliano, and Rodrigo, the shop's veterans, saw Mauricio's grin and got the signal. A show was about to begin. "What do we have here, boss?" Patricio entered with a sly grin. "New receptionist?" "Better," Mauricio said, clapping slowly in theatrical fashion. "She wants to be a mechanic." Laughter erupted. Emiliano wiped away tears. Rodrigo made a lipstick gesture with his fingers. "Maybe you're in the wrong place," Rodrigo said. "This isn't a beauty salon." Nayara stayed calm, but her clenched fists trembled ever so slightly. She'd heard this before, but never with such intensity and never with such deliberate cruelty. "Mr. Santander, if you'd just give me one chance to show what I can do," she tried again. "Very well," he said, standing and circling her like a shark around its prey. "I have a challenge." He pointed through the glass. "That Porsche 911's been sitting dead for a week. Our best mechanics haven't figured it out. If you can diagnose and fix what they couldn't, I'll give you the whole workshop." Silence fell like a hammer. Even the laughter died down. "But if you fail," Mauricio continued with a sadistic gleam in his eye, "you sign here, promising never to step foot in a professional shop in this city again, not even as an intern, not even to mop the floor." Patricio stepped closer, brow furrowed. "Boss, you sure about this? That engine's no joke." "There are no coincidences here," Mauricio growled. "A woman from a neighborhood garage is not going to solve what you couldn't." Nayara took a deep breath, looked around. The stares, the sneering smiles, the venomous whispers, everyone ready to watch her fall, certain she wouldn't last 5 minutes. But she was tired. Tired of pretending it didn't hurt. Tired of accepting less. Tired of shrinking to fit. "I accept," she said firmly, locking eyes with Mauricio. For a moment he blinked. He hadn't expected that. "But I want everything in writing. And I want every employee present when I open the engine. If I'm going down, I'm doing it with a full audience." Mauricio grinned. A wide, wicked grin. This was going to be better than he imagined. "Then let's give them a show." And so, the show began. In less than 10 minutes, the workshop had turned into a stage. Benches were brought in, phones set up to record, and whispers spread like gasoline catching fire. A woman's going to work on the Porsche? Mauricio's lost it. This is going to be beautiful to watch. The black Porsche 911 gleamed under the workshop lights like a gladiator waiting for sacrifice. Around it, about 20 employees formed a semicircle, some with arms crossed, others snickering quietly, all expecting the same thing: failure. Mauricio sat in the center, arms folded, the posture of an emperor. Beside him, Patricio, Emiliano, and Rodrigo swapped low jokes, placing bets on how many minutes she'd last before quitting. "Ladies and gentlemen," Mauricio announced theatrically, "welcome to the show of the year. On one side, Nayara Morales, 5 years of oil changes. On the other, a precision German engine that's defeated our top technicians for a full week." Laughter. Sarcastic applause. But Nayara didn't seem to hear it. She approached the Porsche with a calmness that felt completely out of place in that hostile environment. She didn't touch the car, didn't open the hood. She simply walked around it, slowly, eyes scanning, as if decoding an invisible riddle. "Lost already?" Emiliano teased. "Need help finding the hood latch? Maybe she's waiting for a man to show her what to do," Rodrigo murmured, chuckling. But Nayara didn't respond. She kept circling the car, eyes locked on the details, marks on the floor, cables, used tools, the position of screws. Everything spoke to her, and she listened. "Do you see what I see?" Patricio whispered. "She's got no idea what she's doing, just pretending to think." "She won't make it to lunchtime," Emiliano snorted. Then Nayara spoke, quietly. Only those closest heard. "You tried 3 different approaches on this engine. Checked the injection system, spark plugs, and electrical system. Right?" Rodrigo stopped laughing. "How do you know that?" "Marks on the parts, tools used, order of disconnected cables. You left clues everywhere." Mauricio leaned forward slightly. Something in her tone, in her certainty, was unsettling. "You're just copying us?" Patricio shot back. "Trying not to make the same mistakes?" "If you failed," Nayara replied, looking him dead in the eye, "then it's important to understand what you did. Not to copy it, but to avoid repeating it." The response struck like lightning. Don Evaristo, the oldest mechanic in the shop, 65 years of experience, more silence than words, stepped forward, curious. He had come to be entertained, but now he was intrigued. "What are you seeing, girl?" he asked, his tone more respectful than anyone else's so far. "Something strange. The wear on these parts doesn't match the kind of failure you're describing." Silence. Her terms were technical, precise. Her tone calm. Nothing about her felt like someone desperate to prove herself. She seemed in control. "It's not injection," Nayara continued. "Not electrical, not fuel. It's synchronization." "Impossible," Emiliano burst out. "We checked that 3 times." "Using which method?" she asked. "The standard one. The generic one, or the one specific to this generation of Porsche 911? Total silence. Nayara's words hit like hammers. Don Evaristo blinked slowly. That wasn't neighborhood garage knowledge. Mauricio crossed his arms tighter. He was starting to sweat. "Where did you learn those procedures?" Nayara shrugged. "In places where precision matters more than appearances." She began rolling up her sleeves. Her movements were measured, precise. No hesitation, as if the engine were an old friend she was reconnecting with, as if she already knew exactly where to touch, as if she'd done this 1,000 times before. "She's just stalling," Patricio muttered. "No," Evaristo said quietly. "That's technique. That's different." The silence deepened. The laughter faded. And for the first time that morning, Mauricio felt fear. There was something about this woman, whom he was sure would crumble in minutes, that was starting to dismantle his empire, one bolt at a time. The Porsche's hood was lifted, revealing its engine, the exposed heart of a sleeping beast. Everyone there had stared at that engine for days, but for the first time, someone looked at it as if it actually made sense. Nayara didn't hesitate. Her fingers touched the components with an almost artistic gentleness, but it wasn't hesitation, it was respect, like a conductor about to lead a dissonant orchestra. And everyone watched, silent, expectant. She began disconnecting cables, one by one. Not in the standard order, not randomly either. It was a strange sequence. No one recognized it, not Patricio, not Emiliano, not Rodrigo. "What exactly is she doing?" Emiliano whispered, more uneasy than sarcastic now. "Never seen that sequence before?" Patricio replied, swallowing hard. Mauricio rose from his chair, slowly, arms crossed, but not in a show of dominance, more like self-restraint. Her confidence was becoming a mirror, and he didn't like what it was reflecting. "Where did you learn to work like that?" he asked, trying to keep his tone neutral. "I never told you where I used to work," Nayara replied, eyes still on the engine. "Well, I'm asking now," he insisted. For the first time since she started, she paused, looked up, and what Mauricio saw was a calm gaze, the gaze of someone who knew exactly what she was doing and was still deciding how much to reveal. "I worked on engines where precision isn't optional, where a single mistake can cost a race or a life." "Races?" Don Evaristo asked, now standing beside her. "What kind?" She hesitated for a second, then said, "Formula, GT, and other high-level competition categories." The words landed like grenades. Mauricio blinked several times. "Formula 1, Formula 3, Formula 2, and yes, also Formula 1, she added, with the ease of someone fully aware of the weight of her words. The silence that followed was so deep, you could hear the faint click of tools being set down. "That's impossible," Rodrigo muttered, but his voice lacked conviction. "You're saying you worked on an F1 team?" Emiliano asked, stunned. "McLaren, Williams, Red Bull Racing, 2 full seasons, 2019 and 2020. She said it while returning her attention to the engine, as if simply reciting her resume. No drama, no bragging. Mauricio took a step back. The name Red Bull Racing echoed in his mind like a funeral bell tolling for his ego. He knew that team, knew the car, the driver, the level of demand, and he knew what it meant. Nayara wasn't just good, she was elite. "This doesn't make sense. If you were all that, what are you doing here?" She paused. Her eyes, for a moment, lost their technical spark and dipped into something deeper, darker. Politics, wrong connections, forced silence, and the fact that I was the only woman on the lead technical team. It hit like a collective punch to the gut. The truth had weight, and now it hung over the workshop like a storm cloud. "They blamed you for a mistake that wasn't yours?" Evaristo asked, voice heavy with outrage. "A factory flaw in a newly released part, but by the time they proved it, I'd already been thrown to the wolves. No one stood up for you?" "Some tried. But in places where contracts are worth millions, no one risks their own career for someone labeled a problem." The raw honesty in her words cut through the pride of everyone there. And for the first time, even Patricio and Emiliano didn't know where to look. The woman they had mocked was, in fact, more qualified than all of them, combined. Mauricio couldn't speak. He was processing, swallowing the bitter taste of his own ignorance. Nayara gently closed the hood, looked at the crowd, took a deep breath. "This engine was modified for competition. You applied standard protocols to a system that was no longer standard, and that created the symptoms you saw." She started walking toward the car's driver's seat. "I've corrected that. Now the only question is whether you're ready to hear what it has to say." Mauricio didn't even notice the cold sweat forming, because in that moment he knew the roar that was coming wasn't just the engine. It was the roar of a woman they had all tried to silence, and she was about to scream. The silence in the workshop was so thick that any sound felt like an explosion. Nayara sat behind the wheel of the Porsche 911 like a queen taking her throne. Her fingers found the ignition key with familiarity. Every gesture she made carried new weight, new meaning. Mauricio stood just a few feet away, but it felt like she was in another world, a world he had never stepped into. Sweat trickled down his neck, and his arms, once folded in arrogance, now hung limp at his sides. "Is it going to work?" Patricio whispered, barely breathing. "She thinks it will," Rodrigo replied, though without conviction. His words were more like a crumbling shield against what everyone was already feeling. Nayara didn't respond. She simply looked through the windshield, eyes sweeping across the workshop, memorizing every face present. Then, in a voice as serene as a sacred vow, she said, "At Red Bull, we don't start engines hoping they'll run. We start them knowing they will." She turned the key. The roar that erupted inside the workshop wasn't just an engine coming to life. It was a system awakening with fury and precision. It was as if the car had been asleep, misunderstood for far too long. And now it was finally speaking for itself. The sound was clean, deep, harmonious, a symphony of German engineering tuned to perfection. Mauricio stepped back as if the roar had physically pushed him. Patricio staggered slightly. Emiliano's eyes widened. Rodrigo grabbed onto the nearest bench for balance, and Don Evaristo smiled. The smile of someone who knows a mechanical miracle when he hears one. "Dear God," he whispered, 40 years of listening to engines, and I've never heard one sound like that." Nayara gently pressed the accelerator. The engine responded with surgical precision. No hesitation, no rough vibration. None of the strange issues that had baffled the other mechanics for days. It was as if each cylinder was singing. One voice, one mechanical lung breathing in perfect health. She turned off the engine. Silence returned, but it wasn't the same silence. It was sacred, an altar's hush. She stepped out of the car and walked toward the circle of spectators. Something had changed. Her walk was no longer cautious. She now moved like someone who knew she belonged, and no one could deny it anymore. "You asked how this was possible," she said, without raising her voice. "It's simple. You were trying to speak to this engine in a language it no longer understands." Everyone stood frozen. "It was modified, internally, adapted, and you treated it like it was still standard, as if any fix would do. But competition requires precision. You don't guess. You understand, you listen." She pointed at the three mechanics. "Every attempt you made to fix it created a new problem. Wrong diagnosis, wrong action. It's like trying to tune a piano by replacing strings without adjusting the tension." Rodrigo looked down. Emiliano crossed his arms but said nothing. Patricio swallowed hard. Mauricio still couldn't move. "You want to know what I did?" Nayara continued, now locking eyes with the workshop owner. "I recalibrated the timing, adjusted the fuel mixture to the engine's internal modifications, and corrected the 3 diagnostic errors that triggered the chaos." She paused, then delivered the final blow. "Motorsport mechanics isn't about strength. It's about listening. It's about detail. It's about respecting what the machine is trying to tell you." No one said a word. Mauricio opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. And in that instant, everyone understood. The woman he tried to humiliate had just dismantled his empire with a wrench and a flawless diagnosis. And the engine roared not just to run, but to say that she was right, and they were all wrong. For a few seconds, Mauricio stood completely still, as if the ground had vanished beneath his feet. Around him, his employees watched, not with admiration, but with anticipation, because they had all heard it. Everyone knew the promise. "Mr. Santander," Nayara's voice sliced through the silence like a sharp blade. "We have a deal to discuss." Mauricio blinked, swallowing hard. The sentence echoed in his mind like thunder. He had said it out loud, publicly. "If you fix this engine, I'll give you my shop." Words spoken with arrogance, with full confidence in her failure, but now those words were nailed to reality, solid and inescapable. "You really want to claim that?" he asked, trying to sound firm, though his voice shook. "I want what was promised," Nayara replied. "No anger, no revenge, just professional certainty. Nothing more, nothing less." Tension spread across the workshop like smoke. Carlos, a young mechanic who had watched everything from the beginning, took a step forward. "We all heard it, boss. Every one of us." Mauricio looked at him, surprised by the boldness. But Carlos didn't back down. "And if your word doesn't mean anything after a bet, how can we trust it when it comes to our wages, overtime, or anything else?" Mauricio felt the pressure on his shoulders. The empire he'd spent 20 years building was starting to collapse, not because of a technical failure, but because of a failure of character. "You really want this, to be my partner?" he asked in a voice that bordered on pleading. Nayara didn't hesitate. "I do, but not for ego, not for revenge. I want it because I see what this shop could become, with the right knowledge, with respect for talent, with a new culture." Don Evaristo slowly stepped forward. He looked at Mauricio like an old friend who had just witnessed both the worst and the best of him. "I've seen it all, Mauricio, since the beginning, and I can say this. I've never witnessed such a technical display of skill in all my years here. If you don't honor your word, you'll lose far more than a workshop. You'll lose yourself." Mauricio looked around. The faces that once revered him were now judging him, weighing his integrity. He could feel it. His respect hung by a thread. He sighed. "Long, deep, heavy. What exactly do you want, Nayara? Full partnership, equal share, a decision-making seat, and the chance to rebuild this workshop into something greater than it ever was, with access to what I know, with the connections I have, and the freedom to transform it." Mauricio lowered his gaze. Inside, something broke, but it was a necessary break, the sound of an old ego crumbling. He raised his head, and for the first time, his voice came out clean. "Then we have a deal." Nayara extended her hand. "Partners?" Mauricio stared at her for what felt like forever, and shook. "Partners." The applause that followed wasn't just for her victory, it was for his transformation, for the man who had the courage to recognize his own failure, and for the beginning of something no one there had ever thought possible. Santander Auto Shop had just gained a new last name. 3 weeks later, the workshop was no longer the same, not just because of the reorganized tools, the new protocols, or the structural redesign Nayara had implemented with surgical precision, but because of the atmosphere, the respect, the living presence of a new kind of leadership. Mauricio now arrived 2 hours earlier than usual each day. He sat with Nayara in the early morning light for technical lessons on competition engines, precision diagnostics, and performance strategies. He took notes, asked questions, absorbed everything. "Professor?" he'd joke each morning, smiling humbly. "Good morning, student," she'd reply, with the same playful tone, but with the firm gaze of someone who takes transformation seriously. The man who once said, "Women don't understand engines," was now learning from one. Carlos, the young mechanic who had stood up for his word, was promoted. It turned out his sensitivity to electrical systems made him the perfect lead for digital diagnostics. Maria, once just the woman handling accounting, revealed she had a mechanical engineering degree. She now led one of the shop's new technical divisions. Even Patricio, who had resisted fiercely, ended up resigning. He left quietly, but before going, left a note for Don Evaristo. "I regret it. I hope one day I earn a second chance somewhere else." Evaristo, for his part, was full of admiration. "Never thought I'd see this in my lifetime," he said one morning. "People being judged by what they know, not by what they look like. But the greatest transformation was still to come. On a sunny afternoon, Nayara walked in holding a black folder, her eyes lit with that fire Mauricio had come to deeply respect. "McLaren reached out," she said. "They want to open a technical training center in South America, and they want our workshop to be the base." Mauricio's eyes widened. This is real. The contract's right here. Signed. Santander Morales Motorsports is about to become the first official McLaren Technical Training Center on the continent. Mauricio slowly sat down. His legs were shaking. "And there's more," Nayara continued. "The Ministry of Education approved our proposal to create the country's first technical school focused on competitive motorsports. We're going to train the next generation, create access, open doors." Mauricio couldn't hold it in. The tears came. He wiped his eyes with hands still stained with grease, now a symbol of pride, not dominance. "All of this because I tried to humiliate you? All of this because you had the courage to change," Nayara replied. "The mistake was the beginning. The transformation was the choice." The opening ceremony of the new center was packed. Press outlets, team representatives, engineers, students, and also old mechanics from small-town garages, women who had hidden their resumes, young people who dreamed of racing but never had a chance. Maria, now chief engineer, took the microphone. "6 months ago, I was invisible here. Today, I lead a team because someone had the courage to see talent where no one else was looking." Nayara received a standing ovation, but her eyes were fixed on one thing, the black Porsche 911, now on display as a symbol of rebirth. And Mauricio? He stepped up to the stage, not as the man who once ruled, but as the man who had learned. "I was arrogant, I was blind, I was unfair, but thanks to her, I learned that true leadership is having the courage to become a student. And there's nothing more powerful than recognizing the value of someone the world insists on underestimating." Applause, tears, smiles of relief. That night, as the workshop emptied and the lights dimmed, Nayara and Mauricio stood there in silence, gazing at the floor that was once the stage for mockery, and now a sanctuary of transformation. "You know what excites me most about the future?" Mauricio asked. "What?" "That one day a Formula One car will cross the finish line, and someone will say, 'That engine was tuned by a student trained right here.'" Nayara smiled. "And it all started with a challenge, a silent engine, and a woman who refused to stay silent any longer. The engine roared that day, and more than bringing a car back to life, it brought an entire world crashing down. An old world built on fragile certainties, on arrogance disguised as authority, on the belief that only a few are born to lead. And from that collapse, something new was born, a workshop was reborn, an empire was rebuilt. But above all, a man was transformed, because he had the humility to finally listen to something he had never heard before, the voice of overlooked excellence. Nayara didn't just reconnect cables or recalibrate an engine. She recalibrated destinies, reconnected people with their own values, opened doors that had been locked for far too long. And if you've made it this far, know this. Maybe what you're hearing isn't just the sound of an engine. Maybe it's something inside you asking to wake up. If this story moved you, share it. If you've ever been underestimated, tell us in the comments. And if you believe talent has no gender, no color, no social status, spread this message, because maybe, just maybe, one simple click from you could be the spark someone else needs to get their own engine roaring again.